Do you ever just fully convince yourself that a book is going to be a 5-star, regardless of what anybody says, any reviews that you hear? You're just convinced. That's how I'm feeling about the fantasy romances that I will be reading in this video. I have been desperately craving some fantasy romances. I have been reading so many contemporary romances this year. I'm just like, my brain is falling out of my head and I need some fantasy. So in today's video, we are going to be reading all of the fantasy romances that I've been putting off because I'm convinced they're going to be 5 stars, and therefore I am scared, terrified, shaking in my boots to pick them up. So we're going to start with Vicious Oaths. This is a recent release, I'm pretty sure, but I have heard amazing things about it, and I'm buddy reading this with a friend, so I'm excited to get into it and just gush all about it. We recently read Shield of Sparrows together and really loved it, and so I'm hoping this is a similar experience. And there's some others that I plan to read for this video that I'm excited for, including some recent releases and that kind of stuff. So let's just get right into the reading vlog, and fingers crossed for a 5-star. So I suppose we can talk about the first 50-ish% of Vicious Oaths are Vicious Oaths. So the book started off very strong. This follows Kadisha and Malachi. Kadisha is the arch princess to a kingdom that has basically like king, and then there are like sub kingdoms with kings. They're like called prime kings or some shit underneath. Since birth, engaged to the main king. His name is Rashad. They're Fae, and so Rashad has been alive for ever, but she's like fresh. I guess like she's like 23 or something, and that's how long she's actually lived. There is a prophecy about her that was told before she was born, that basically she would unite all of the kingdoms and her heir would be the heir to all of the kingdoms. So like this kingdom that she's from, it's called the 6th kingdom, and then there's other kingdoms that are not under Rashad, and he wants to take all of the other kingdoms. So he thinks that this prophecy will help him do that. Shows up at her kingdom to have the wedding, and the night before their wedding, she sleeps with a random stranger in this like brothel or den that she owns, and he gets word that she sullied his reputation, basically, and slaughters her entire kingdom. And the guy that she slept with is actually at that ceremony. And after Rashad has basically slaughtered all of her people, including her father, the guy comes in and saves Kadisha and her band of warriors. She has like a band of warriors that are paired with these like war serpent type creatures. Rashad ends up getting away, but it's revealed to be Malachi, who is the newly appointed king of the Apollyon court, which is a court that has been vilified in the 6 kingdoms for being very vicious. All of the 6 kingdoms rulers got together and planned, with the assistance of some insiders in the Apollyon court, a coup against the Apollyon court to get the ruling family, so Malachi's parents and him, off the throne by murdering them. But Malachi's father or mother protected him, so his parents were murdered right in front of him. His aunt is ruling the kingdom until he comes of age, and then he takes over. And his big plan as king is to eliminate all of the people that plotted his parents' murder. So he comes to the 6th kingdom, intending originally to kill Rashad and kill all of them there, and he kind of takes the opportunity that Rashad gives him to like sit back and watch Rashad's people murder everybody, and then comes in, and Rashad gets away, and Malachi and Kadisha make a alliance or a pact together, I guess, to take Rashad down, because Kadisha doesn't like him and she doesn't want to be married to him. She knows that if he dies, this prophecy will never happen, and she can just go about being the heir to her own kingdom. So they make a deal that Kadisha will go back to the Apollyon court and pretend to be Malachi's war prize, and they will work to bait out Rashad so that they can kill him, and then they can go about their business, and their pact or whatever will end. Like I said, the story starts off incredibly strong. It does start off with an early hookup because obviously Malachi is that guy that she hooks up in the brothel with, but they definitely do not like each other. They definitely do not get along. Kadisha is not swayed by his very charming and cocky and arrogant personality. Malachi is very drawn in by her feistiness, and right off the bat, Kadisha was someone that was very different than we usually see in a fantasy romance. Even when we have these female characters who are queens or princesses or whatever, they tend to, when they get kidnapped by the hero or by someone, they tend to be very meek and very reactive. They don't try to fight back. They don't try to push back. They don't assert their own dominance, even though ostensibly they've been raised to be the heir and be queen or whatever. But Kadisha is very different. She does not take any shit. She actively uses her powers on him and manipulates him. Politically, she very much uses her own smarts and intelligence to get one up on him and kind of give as good as he gives, which I really, really love. I love the dynamic between the two. This is like a true enemies situation, where Malachi is obviously hates her kingdom, hates her lineage, wants to eliminate her, and eventually bring the sixth kingdom under him as the High King. And she knows this, but they have a common goal, so they have to work together, and they are begrudgingly attracted to each other. They had this one really great night of amazing sex, the night before or when they were at that brothel, and so they're attracted to each other, but they truly do not like each other. And like I said, Kadisha is definitely the standout character in this. She made the beginning portion of this novel just so good. I loved watching her assert her own independence and actually be smart and proactive with her own demands rather than just going along with whatever is forced upon her. Malachi himself, I was right off the bat not really that, into. He is kind of a player, which I don't really love, and he's not a very good king. He recently took over the crown from his aunt, who was running in his place until he got old enough, because he's also a fae, but he's also only 23 or something like that. So he is not used to being a king. I don't necessarily think he was trained on how to be a king, even though his aunt was a great regent and she taught him everything that he knows. He doesn't necessarily care to do the kingly things and appease his people and show strength with his people. And I just don't really love his character. I don't necessarily mind a king who, puts on this cold, fierce front with other kingdoms to kind of prove that he's not to be fucked with. But I want a king who does everything in his power to be a good king for his people. I want him to be strict, but also very loving and considerate and want to be better for his people. And I just don't really feel like that's Malachi's character. He is really only concerned with fucking and with getting revenge. And I just don't really like that in someone who's in a position of power. And I just don't really understand his character in general, because he's very hollow, in my opinion, because there just doesn't seem to be a lot of feeling and depth behind his character. Aside from this revenge plot line, we don't really know anything about him. Kadisha and Malachi have had several conversations outside of the fucking, because there's quite a bit. And they've had a couple of conversations getting to know each other, but I don't, and you do get his point of view, but I still just don't really understand where the author wanted to go with his character. And it's kind of frustrating for me. So when we got to the 50% mark, because I'm at like 55% or something like that. When we got to the 50% mark, they have what I would assume is like fated mates sex. You know, if you've read like a fated mates story before, there's always this one sexual encounter that like locks their bond into place. And that's what I'm assuming that this sexual encounter is about. Malachi in particular goes from being kind of this irreverent playboy who just wants to fuck to being completely obsessed, never wanting to let her go, wanting to be everything for her. And we don't really like something that I was excited for with his character was to see him slowly become obsessed with the heroine. That's one of my favorite tropes, especially in a fantasy romance. And it was almost like this flip switched, which is frustrating for me. To counteract that, Kadisha is very like, I don't know, she's very drawn in by the sex and she feels like a pull to him, like that she can't stop. But logically, when she takes a step back, she's like, this is kind of weird. Like there's some weird stuff going on with this. So I do think that there's something there, but I'm just frustrated with, I think, Malachi's character. That being said, the plot is quite interesting. With a lot of these stories where the heroine is kidnapped by the hero and she goes and lives in his castle or his kingdom for some reason, it tends to be just the heroine not really doing a lot, not really making plans, not really learning anything. And she kind of is just sitting in her room doing nothing. And this is definitely not like that. Kadisha is an active participant in what's going on in his court, which I really appreciate. So there's definitely parts of the story that I'm enjoying. I'm just not in love with the romance. And when they had sex for the first time, or when the first couple of times, I was like, you know what? It's fine. Like, I'm not a big early hookup fan, but I was excited to see them go from the sex to the feelings. And like I said, I was excited for Malachi to become completely obsessed with her. And so because that was the part that I was like holding off on, that I was excited about for Malachi's character in particular, and now that it's happened, I'm like, I don't know. It's just kind of, I don't know. We'll see how I feel when the story wraps up, but like I said, Keisha's character is fantastic. The plots are good, and, you know, I want to see how everything resolves itself. I'm just not in love with the romance. So okay, I talked for almost 20 minutes in that initial clip about this book, and I still somehow forgot to talk about one of the biggest issues that I had as the story went on, which is the writing. When I initially started the book, I loved the writing. Very lush, very sophisticated. However, as I read more of the book, the run-on sentences became really hard to read. I am dyslexic, and it can be very hard for me to read things that are not written in a way that my brain can easily supply for me. So when fonts are weird, when sentence like syntax is weird, when a sentence is not set up the way my brain kind of expects it to be, it can be kind of hard for me to read. So I'm not saying that this will be everyone's experience, but the writing is, the sentences, especially the dialogue between the characters, it's like run-on sentences for days, and just the sentences are so bloated. There's so many words in each sentence that could have been cut down to make it less wordy, you know? So I wanted to give you an example. Now, if I'm counting correctly, there is 3 periods in this entire paragraph. Another thing that I'll let you in on is, even though I've told you how I will maneuver you to your death, it matters not. Because your ego will still make you think you can somehow enjoy the screw and best me. I am going to relish staring you in the eyes and watching the light fade from them as you lament underestimating me and not being a wiser member of the cock-swinging club. Now, that is not necessarily the worst, and sometimes one sentence will take up the whole thing. Like, it's just very wordy, very long, and it's just really unnecessary. It's not lending any description, it's not lending additional description, it's not making the world feel more fleshed out. It's just too much, which is another added problem that I am having reading this book. At the end of the day, I am just a girl sitting in front of her Kindle begging for a 5-star romantasy. And sometimes we don't get what we want, no matter how hard we try. So I finished Our Vicious Oaths. This, I found out, was the author's debut adult romantasy novel. So with that in mind, take my review with kind of like a grain of salt. They have written a YA story that people really, really loved, and I would be very interested to follow this author's career. That being said, I was not the biggest fan of this. I really was not the biggest fan of the hero. The romance was really where this story fell apart for me, which was unfortunate because I loved the political intrigue, loved the fantasy world, I loved the heroine. Like, I could read 20 more books of the heroine. I just did not like the hero, and I didn't like his characterization. And I was telling my buddy Reed, who, by the way, is loving this book, so I could be in the minority of people that didn't really love this. And the Goodreads reviews also kind of allude to the fact that people are loving this or did love this. I told this to my buddy Reed. I wish that this had just been in the heroine's point of view, because there was so much to Malachi's personality that lends itself to a good romance hero, but being in his point of view kind of made me realize how underdeveloped he was. It kind of made me side-eye him a little bit because of the decisions that he was making that didn't really make a lot of sense with how he was being characterized in his own head. And that 50% mark where they just are suddenly in love, like I said, the heroine was definitely like not really trusting him, not really believing him, but he was on board 1,000,000%. From like, it almost seems like this flip was switched. This switch was flipped. From that point forward, I was like, this romance kind of sucks. So I think this author has the bones to write a really good fantasy. Their romance elements just need a little bit of work. So that's why I say that I would be down to follow their career in the future. But for now, this one just wasn't like my favorite. And like I said, the run-on sentences and the way that it was written was just very hard for me to read. However, my buddy Reed did say that the audiobook is really good. So maybe if you're interested in picking this up and I haven't dissuaded you, which I'm not trying to dissuade you, I'm just giving you like my honest opinions, maybe check out the audiobook. If you like, for some reason, have the chance to pick it up, maybe check out the audiobook and then come back to this video and tell me if the audiobook is good, because I think this author and this book had the trappings to be really good, but it just missed the mark in some ways. And as we know, I'm pretty critical of books. I'm pretty picky. I wouldn't necessarily say that this opinion that I have, like, you're also going to have. And this isn't a book I'm trying to warn you off of. Like, We Who Will Die, I genuinely don't understand anybody who likes that book. But this I could see. Especially if you're relatively new to fantasy romance, I think this could hit the spot for you, because it hits all the notes of like a fun fantasy romance, of like the hero being a shadow daddy and all that kind of stuff. But it is more focused on the heroine's journey. And I do want to get into spoilers a little bit, because there is something about her story that I did not like and I wanted to talk about a little bit. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, to this timestamp. They start having a lot of unprotected sex, and they're fae, and so the way that their reproductive cycles work is like it seems like they'll have a year where they're fertile and a year where they're not. And she assumes that she is not in her fertility year, so they have a ton of unprotected sex. Her mother tells her that the mark, because they were biting each other during sex, that I alluded to, was like a mating situation. They didn't talk about being fated mates, but that's kind of what it is. The bite mark that they were doing can like fix or fuck up your fertility cycle or whatever. So she ends up getting pregnant, which I don't like surprise or unplanned pregnancies, and I especially was not a fan of the way that it was handled in this story, because one of my biggest pet peeves with the surprise or unexpected pregnancy trope is usually it's not people that are actively okay with having children. They have other plans for their lives, and so this baby is just like throwing a wrench in their life. And I felt that way with this heroine in particular. She just didn't really seem like she wanted a child, and she didn't really seem on board with being a mother. There was nothing about her personality. There was no point in the beginning of the story before she gets pregnant where she's like, I've always wanted kids, but because of the position I'm in, sort of situation. And they even have a conversation because she's intending to terminate the pregnancy, and she's having a conversation with Malachi, and he asks, like, do you even want kids in the future? And her response was like, that's never something that I've even considered. And so for her not to even be able to think about whether she wants kids or not, and then to have a child, I think made me really upset. I just envisioned, I don't know, I just felt like it didn't make sense with the character, and I understood the combining the courts element that came into it, because like her having his heir fulfilled multiple prophecies, but it being put into the story like that, I just felt like the child was a plot device. And this was a standalone, so like I parts of it I understand. I just wish that I had felt more like the heroine actually wanted kids, and it just made me upset the way that she talked about it and the way she reacted to it. And I'm not upset about the fact that she maybe didn't want kids. I'm upset about the fact that she had to have a child when it seemed like she didn't necessarily want one, or she wasn't in a position to even think about having children. I don't know. It really frustrated me, that portion of the story, and I wish that she had that autonomy. Like, ultimately, she decides to keep the child. It's her decision. But she does it for political reasons, not even because she wants a child. So, I don't know. That part was kind of frustrating for me. I really, really, really did not like that plot line. And everything kind of wrapped up in a neat bow after that plot line was introduced. And it was like kind of thrown in towards the latter half, and like everything just moved really fast after that. So I don't know. It was not my favorite storyline. So altogether, this was definitely not a favorite of mine, definitely not an all-time favorite of mine, but this is an author that I will check out in the future. So let's just go ahead and move on to the next book that I will be reading. And I really, 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 really would like a 5-star. Okay, so I am 50% of the way through Thrown in the Dark, I believe is what it's called. This was another, obviously, one that I was anticipating would be a 5-star. This I knew to be sort of along the lines of Assistant to the Villain, kind of a funny rom-com villain dynamic. So we start the book with Damien and Amma. Damien is the half-demon son to a demon lord who was trapped in a crystal by the good king. So it's like this world is like good and evil, capital G, capital E, and evil is like capital E, a whole personality, a whole world, kingdom, all that kind of stuff. Like reveling in being bad, reveling in people saying bad things about you, the whole shebang. And there's a plethora of creatures that fall under the evil category: hags, demons, just a ton of stuff. So Damon is on a quest and has been on a quest for the last 23 years to get his dad out of this crystal. It's been his main goal in life. It's been the only thing that he's ever really worried about. And his plan to do this is by creating a crystal that will allow him to wholesale control the person that he puts the crystal in. And he's going to put it in the king that locked his father away. And Amma is seemingly a human, travels to Damon's father's kingdom to steal the Book of the Undead from one of the libraries in the kingdom. And she ends up running into Damon several times, and the last time results in her touching the crystal, and the crystal gets embedded in her heart. So they go on an adventure together. Amma kind of knows that Damon's probably going to end up killing her for this crystal, but she's forced to go along for the ride. He has a certain level of like coercion over her. All he has to do is say a particular word, and then she has to do whatever he says. And so they are on an adventure together throughout the castle to get to the main city where the good, capital G, king is. Like I said, this is a very typical rom-com fantasy romance. I was a big fan of Assistant to the Villain. I thought it was a lot of fun. I read it on a vacation, and it's just a fun story. It was one of the first of it that I had like read. One of the first like rom-com fantasy romances like that I had read, and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't the biggest fan of the romance. The romance was fine, but overall I found the story to be like giggly and fun. And that's really how I'm feeling about this one as well. I love all of the rom-com elements. I am not the biggest rom-com fan, but I'm finding with this type of storytelling, it works for me because it's like, it's really silly, but it's still in a fantasy world, which is like what I love reading about. So we are seeing a ton of different type of magical creatures, and Damon and Amma have this very quintessential grumpy sunshine. Damon is the definition of a half demon, very grumpy, trying to sow discord and chaos everywhere, and Amma is just unflinchingly, unfailingly sunshine. She's fascinated by everything. She takes everything on the chin. She's scared and not afraid to show that she's scared, but also not afraid to tackle the things that scare her. She fights Damon back. They eventually form a kind of begrudging attraction to each other, a begrudging friendship together. And at this 50% mark, there have been a little bit of like giggly fun moments between them, one of which was Damon having to choose whether to cut the crystal out of her heart and potentially kill her or not. They've had to face several big scary monsters together and protect each other, and it's just been a really delightful book. It's not a 5-star. It doesn't connect me as much as a 5-star, like I would expect a 5-star to, but it's a very strong story for this sort of story. It's very strong for this sort of story that it is, and I think the relationship is a lot of fun. So I would love to finish it and give you my final thoughts. I realized in editing that I did not actually give you my final thoughts, so I'm gonna plop them in right here. Really liked this one. I think if you're a fan of like Assistant to the Villain, or like I said, those like more villainy rom-com stories, you'll like this one. I was charmed ultimately by Amma and Damien's romance. I really loved the friendship that they built and this kind of slow simmering sexual tension that they had. I think they had great on-page chemistry. The world is a ton of fun. I loved seeing all the like evil little creatures in, you know, Damon's kingdom. And I'm very excited to continue the series. So I will for sure be picking up the rest of the series, at least the next book, on audio, because I listened to the first one on audio and it was a fantastic experience. They are on Kindle Unlimited, but I wanted to listen to the audiobooks. And I will definitely be picking up the rest of the series. It just wasn't like a 5-star for me, but it was a pretty strong 4-star. And I've also started the last book that I'm going to read for the video, which is the Book of Azrael. This one, I think, of all of the others on this list, has the most potential to be a 5-star because it's kind of right up my alley. It's dark, obviously fantasy romance, morally gray characters, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of wanted to save it for last just because I wanted to the best chance at this being a 5-star. So we open the book with the main character, who I will have the name of for the next clip. I'm only like maybe 8% of the way through, but right off the bat we know that the heroine is currently working for a guy named Caden, who is the king of all demons, all vampires, werewolves, all of that. King of kings, basically. And he rules any being that is not good, you know, like not human, things that are typically considered bad, like vampires and things like that. And the main character is indebted to Caden. He saved her life, which enabled her to save her sister, like decades ago. I think it's like hundreds of years ago, maybe longer. And so she's indebted to him, and she's kind of become not only his lover, but also his assassin. And in this beginning portion, in this beginning 8%, she's on a mission with one of his other, like, right-hand people, or his, like, cabal of bads, big bads or whatever, a cabal of soldiers, to hunt down this organization called the Hand, who seems to have knowledge of something that Caden wants. It's not fully explained, and there's a lot going on with the world and, like, celestial gods, and there seems to be, like, a god war that happened forever ago that Caden ultimately came out on top of. So it's just a lot going on that we haven't really explored yet, which I appreciate, not just getting a giant info dump. So I'm really liking the writing so far. I think I've tried to read other books by this author and wasn't the biggest fan, but this one is definitely caught my interest so far. So I will continue to read it and let you know how it goes. Like I said, this one has the potential to be a 5-star. But first, I'm going to finish Thrown in the Dark while I play Tales of the Shire. I am officially 50% of the way through Book of Azrael. And I don't know if I'm actually 50% of the way through, but I got through part 1 of 2 of the graphic audio / dramatized audio. I got it through Hoopla through my library, and it's so good. So good. The audiobook is fan-freaking-tastic. It's, like, fully voice acted, sounds, all that kind of stuff, and it's impeccable. And I'm fully obsessed with the story as well. I'm just really, really, really liking it. So, like, 1,000 years ago, there was a war called the God War. From what I gather, basically 2 worlds collided, or multiple worlds collided. There were the celestial beings and also the people that were already there. The people that were already there consider the celestials as, like, bad. You know, they came, they took over their land, they exorcised them, all that kind of stuff. There is a prophecy that the world ender will come and fully destroy civilization and make the celestials, like, the ruling body. So Diane was saved by this guy named, I think his name is Caden. We're gonna go with Caden. Was saved by this guy named Caden, who saved her and her sister when they were dying during a war. I think it was during the God War. I'm not for sure. All I know is she's been alive for, like, a really long time. And in order for the deal with Caden is that she would basically become his assassin, become his right hand, and do whatever he wanted her to do. And he is very, very, very brutal, very much doesn't trust anybody. But he is using Diana and his other right hands to get this Book of Azrael, which I think will allow him to essentially take over and be, like, the king of the entire world, defeat the Celestials, all that kind of stuff. Diana and Caden's right-hand men are basically trying to take down this organization called the Hand, which is supposed to be an organization of Celestials who have access to this Book of Azrael and some other, like, really important old ancient documents that Caden wants. And they end up getting into a tussle with some Celestials who invoke the name of Samuel, I think is Liam's original name. He is a god, and they invoke his name, and he comes down to Diana's world. He had been separated after the God War. He had essentially isolated himself away, but the invocation of his name has summoned him there. He gets there, and he realizes that the Celestials and Diana's people, they have a specific name, but I can't remember how to pronounce it. They are at war, and her people are trying to Caden in particular is trying to take over the Celestials. Diana and Caden's other 2 right-hand people run into Ezekiel, who is one of Liam's guys. Liam's, like, right hands or whatever. They're about to kill Ezekiel, and Diana sees into his memories using her, like, abilities that were gifted to her through the turning process, when Caden saved her. And she sees this, like, deep and abiding love that he has for his mate, I guess is the word they use in this one. And she ends up saving his life, kills Caden's right hands, and forces Ezekiel to take her back to Liam to make a deal.
they get back to Liam's kingdom, and Diana basically says, I will help you take down Caden if you will save my sister, protect her, all that kind of stuff. So they are on a mission to essentially get this book of Azrael that Caden wants and to take Caden down. This writing style is very engrossing. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily the most connected to the characters. I would say that Diana definitely has her own personal motivations, but she's definitely not as fleshed out, in my opinion, as Liam is. Liam is really, really struggling with the idea of being king. He's been king since his father was killed, but he isolated himself away because he's dealing with a lot of PTSD from the God War, seeing a bunch of his family and loved ones slaughtered, including his father, and the weight of being king, which is not something that he ever wanted to deal with. So he has night terrors, he's very volatile, and he just feels this really, really heavy weight to rule. And so we're getting flashbacks of him being trained by his father to take over as king. The book is pretty dark. It's pretty gory. Neither of the characters is really good, I would say. It seems like the Celestials are better than like Caden and his group of people, but I imagine like it's all perspective, you know? Everyone's a little bit morally gray. Everyone's kind of fucked up. Diana is not someone that shies away from killing people. She will kill people to get what she wants, despite being a little bit like, she doesn't love it. She doesn't love killing people. It's not her favorite, and she does feel a lot of guilt, but she recognizes that sometimes it is necessary. So the characters themselves, I would say I'm definitely pulled more towards Liam than Diana, but they both feel like the author knows her characters like the back of her hand. It just hasn't been fully fleshed out for us yet. But the world is fascinating. It's kind of like this urban fantasy setting that I'm really, really, really liking. I'm excited to see some of the other magical beings. There's like vampires and witches and stuff like that that I'm excited to get into. And I'm just really, really liking the audiobook. I'm fascinated by where the romance is going to go, because at the moment they're not the biggest fans of each other. They've had some moments of intimacy between them where they've kind of helped.
Let's talk about my final thoughts on the Book of Azrael. Sorry, I've become obsessed with Tales of the Shire. I've played 30 hours of it in the last 2 days. So loved the Book of Azrael. I don't know how much the graphic audio contributed to my overall rating of the book, but I freaking loved this. I'm so interested to see where especially Diana's storyline goes. The ending, I'm concerned. I'm real concerned. The characters are very compelling. The world just feels so dark and gritty and fleshed out, and like I'm in it, you know? I love the urban fantasy setting. It's not too urban and annoying, but it's there for them to like have technology that makes sense. And I'm just so excited to be in this world again. I'm so excited to be with these characters again. I'm a little bit sad because they did end up having sex and all that and getting together in this book. I would have liked a little bit more of a slow burn, but I think the events of the second one are going to kind of put a wrench in that, which I'm excited for. I thought the fantasy was incredibly strong. I really liked the characters. This is definitely, at least from this series or this book, I gather that this author really focuses on like mental health of characters, really getting to know her characters, which I appreciate because I'm a character-driven person. And the fantasy elements were not like left to the wayside in any way. I really loved it. I loved that we saw Diana and Liam becoming friends first. That is something that both characters desperately needed. They were both very, very alone, very isolated people. Diana was, you know, a lover and the right hand to this man, but none of the people in his kingdom, none of the people that she worked with or lived with on a daily basis were really kind to her. None of them really cared about her. And Liam did have, people that loved him and people that cared about him, but he had been isolated for so long that he was also very, very lonely. And so to see two people who are kind of equally matched, because Liam obviously has these people that love him, but they're like very good people. They're good. They want to do right in the world, and they've obviously evolved in the 1,000 years from where they were before. So Liam is kind of left feeling like he's so different than his loved ones. And so having him find someone, like find that companionship and that comfort in Diana, and likewise with Diana, was so nice to see. I loved that their romance was built on mutual respect and understanding with a little bit of lust rather than being all lust. I don't know. I think there's just so much to this story to love. It's not as dark as I thought it was going to be. It's definitely grittier, but it's not as like gory or dark as I was anticipating. I don't know. I was kind of expecting it to be like a haunting Adeline sort of story where there's just like egregious darkness for no reason, but that was not the case here. This was appropriately dark, and I think even if you are not super into dark stories, you would still really like this one. So I want everyone to pick this up. Like, it's very, very good. I loved the romance, and it was exactly what I wanted, and I finally got my 5 stars. So I'm cheating a little bit because I had read prior to filming this video, but I wanted to talk about it here. So we're going to pop it in at the end, and I can already tell you that it was not a 5-star. It was indeed a DNF, but I really thought that it was going to be a 5-star because I had heard that it had similar vibes to Shield of Sparrows. I really, really freaking loved that one. And so I was optimistic. And that was We Who Will Die, or We Who Will, something like that. This one. This has been making its rounds. Everybody has been loving it. It had, when I checked it, like a crazy high rating on Goodreads. And I was just very excited to get into it. So me and my buddy Reed picked it up. And right off the bat, my impressions of it weren't the best, but it was kind of one of those popcorn reads where it's like the writing is quite propelling and there is enough there to grab onto that it's like, okay, I'm not having a bad time reading it. So I continued to read, and I finally got to 70% when I was like, this is bad and I cannot continue to read this. Like, it's just, if I continue to put myself through the torture of finishing this book, it's going to be a 2-star, and like, we're not doing that. So I DNF'd it. Let's talk about the books. Let's talk about all of my thoughts, and let's talk about why, if you have similar taste to me, I want you to avoid this book with all of your being. So this follows a heroine that I don't even remember the name of because she's that forgettable. First of all, the description for it compares it to Carissa Broadbent, which I think is like a bold-faced freaking lie, and like, how dare them. But it also compares it to Rebecca Yarros, which is quite fair. RVL. This follows R, and she is a gladiator. In this world, it's kind of like a Roman Greek inspired story with gladiators, and there is a very brutal, tyrannical king whose main purpose of being on the throne is to overtake governments and expand his empire. And part of his show of strength is to have everyone that reaches a certain age to go into this like gladiator ring and fight for their lives. And it's kind of forced on people that don't have a lot of money because you are given like a monetary reward to compete and win, or at least survive it. At the beginning of the novel, R has already completed the trial and she survived, and now she is taking care of her 2 younger brothers, one of whom is like very, very sick, and he's going to die if he doesn't have this very rare, expensive medication. So she has been bodyguarding for random rich people and taking care of her brothers when a vampire named Braun comes to her and says, if you enter into the trial of the Sundering to become one of the King's Guards, I will pay you money to infiltrate the King's Guards and murder the king. And I will cure your brother. I'll take him to the best healers in the world. I'll get him cured, and we'll set you off on like a path for the rest of your life. So of course she has to undergo these trials, and Braun is kind of cures her brother, but also is kind of holding them hostage and kind of holding all of them hostage. So she goes into this academy where she's going to train to take part in these trials, and then she takes part in these trials. When she gets there, there is like the Impervious or Imperious or something, who are the King's Guard, like they're the elite guards. And that's the group that she needs to infiltrate if she's going to get access to the king. The leader of the King's Guard is the Emperor. I keep calling him the king, but he's the Emperor. The Emperor's son, and someone that she had a romantic relationship with back when she was a kid. They were childhood friends. They started a romantic relationship, and then he up and disappeared one day with no word. So she holds a lot of anger and animosity towards him because he never gave her word on why he was leaving, why he just up and left their romantic relationship, whatever. She hasn't seen him since. And right off the bat, you pretty much immediately can guess, if you have two brain cells to rub together, that he is not only the Emperor's son, and he's obviously this dude that she had a childhood relationship with. I don't know if that's like in the description, but if it's not, like, it's not a spoiler because it's very fucking obvious that that is the case. If you've read like more than one fantasy romance, you probably could have figured it out. She goes into these trials and it's quite gory. At least it's supposed to be quite gory. When you think of gladiators, you think of Russell Crowe, but also like people getting axed in the head, brutal fighting, like trials like that. And that's just not what we got here. There were very weirdly gory and intense scenes of horrific things happening interspersed with a quite bland story. And that was the main issue that I had with this story overall, is all of the characters are like as shallow as a puddle. None of the characters had any distinctive features whatsoever, and every single, like, the story was packed with people, absolutely packed with new names, and you were supposed to know who these people were. You're supposed to know whether they were vampires or not, even if the author didn't expressly tell you whether they were or not. For example, the love interest, he is a vampire, and I didn't know that until like 50% of the way through, when it just suddenly is mentioned that it was a vampire and that they drank each other's blood. I had no idea up to that point. I didn't know the Emperor was a vampire because the world building is so poorly written and explained, and all of the characters, like I said, are shallow as puddles. Specifically, R. She is horrendously boring. She makes no good decisions during the entire story. All of the things that happen in the story are done to her, and she makes a decision to trust people that makes literally no sense. Like, people she just should not be trusting, and it makes no sense for her to trust them. For example, you have Rorik, who I remember his name because he's the only character with any other depth in this story. You have Rorik, who is the Emperor's son and heir, and he is incredibly cruel, and he murders people, he tortures people, and he seems to kind of like get off on the torturing. This is a complete side note, but this romance in the story is literally a carbon copy of A Court of Thorns and Roses. I don't say that lightly because I hate when people compare every fantasy romance to ACOTAR, but it's genuinely ACOTAR. She has a couple of run-ins with Rorik, and then halfway through the story, she sees him like torturing people, killing people, like pushing her up against walls and like bullying her, making fun of her, doing horrible things to other people. And then suddenly he's like, hey, I know you have a scheme to kill the king. I'm going to help you. And then has her assassinate someone that isn't the king. And it's like, you had you have zero brain cells. You have zero critical thinking skills. Aside from all of the messiness of the characters, there's really no effort put into building the world and making it believable or understandable at all. There was just so many different ideas I feel like the author had to put in her book, and she just threw them all in at once. Like, the vampires were not really relevant or part of the story. Like, you could have removed the vampires from the story and it would have been the story would not have been any different at all. Like, at least the first one. Obviously I can't speak for the rest of the series, but this first one, the vampires were completely meaningless. Like, it wasn't even like the vampires had all the power, the humans had no power, because there were humans that also had power and there were vampires that didn't have power. So the vampire element was not relevant in any way. And all of the themes and things that I feel like you would have associated with like a gladiator romance were just, it was non-existent. It just wasn't there. Like, every once in a while they went into a coliseum and they were forced to kill prisoners. And that's it. Like nothing, the main character wasn't training. She wasn't getting better in any noticeable way. She suddenly magically had, oh, I forgot to mention that there are people in this world that are like secretly gifted with powers, and people can tell whether you have powers or not because you get like a sigil on your head, and the more powerful you are, the bigger your sigil is. And so she has a very small sigil, and then she like is forced to kill, and as she kills in these trials, like the sigil gets bigger and she can use like the powers that she gets from killing. Like, it's horribly explained. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense, but it's also like so unbelievably cookie cutter in the same breath, which just doesn't, like, how do you accomplish that? So I really did not like it. I honestly felt horrible DNFing the book at 70%, but I'm happy that I did so because my buddy Reed finished it and she was like, yeah, it doesn't do anything. Like there's no point in finishing it. And it feels bad to DNF at 70% because I don't consider that a read book. And I would have liked to at least get credit for it. But so you guys can pat me on the back for reading this book so you guys don't have to, because don't even waste your KU space on this book because it was truly horrendously flat. And I'm a little bit disappointed in all of the like influencers, the book content creators who are like hyping this book up, because it's not even mid. It's like if you very occasionally had a thought pop in your head and you were like, oh, I'm going to put that in a book. And then 2 years later, you're like, oh, I have this thought, I'm going to put it in a book. And then you just put all of those together where it's like, doesn't make any sense. And it's like flat as fuck. That's what it felt like. So I have spent way too long ranting about this book. Let's get back into the actually good books. This is me from the past. I don't know if any of these those books that I talked about were a 5-star. I really hope for my sake that they were, but let's get back to it. That is it for this video. I would love to talk down below your thoughts on anything that I read, what you're currently reading, what you have on your fantasy romance TBR. I'm looking for books to add. So let me know down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you're looking for more content like this from me. I post media related videos really whenever I feel like it. And I would love for you to join my little community. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next one.